Wind rolled across the wide basin like a slow breath from the desert, carrying dust, heat, and the faint scent of juniper. The stagecoach wheels hammered along the lonely trail, each jolt rattling the young woman sitting inside. She kept both hands folded tight on her lap, as if holding herself together. She had traveled far already, farther than she ever thought a mail-order bride would go, deeper into Apache lands than any Eastern woman dreamed of. Folks back home spoke in low voices when they learned where she was headed. Some called her brave. Others whispered that she would never return. But she knew one thing for certain. Turning back was no longer an option. The coach driver kept glancing at her through the small opening. He seemed to be warning her with his eyes. Though he said nothing, his look carried a message plain as written words. Once he dropped her off at the camp, her life would no longer belong to the world she had known. It would belong to the man she was promised to, the one the territory folks called the Apache King. No one dared say his real name. They said he carried the strength of the mountains in his shoulders and the calm of deep water in his voice. They said he ruled his people with both fairness and fear. And now, he had asked for a bride, a mail-order bride. When the wheels slowed, the woman felt her breath catch. The trail opened into a clearing where tall poles, woven hides, and smoke from cook fires rose into the golden sky. The settlement felt alive. Children ran near the edge of the corral. Women stirred pots that smelled of peppers and roasted corn. Warriors moved with quiet strength, painted with the colors of their people, watching everything with sharp eyes. The place seemed peaceful on the surface, yet a quiet tension lived beneath it. She felt it as soon as she stepped down from the stage. The driver helped her with her small trunk, then hesitated. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, warn her maybe. But instead he tipped his hat and rode off without a word. The sound of the wheels faded, until only the crackle of fire and the distant call of a hawk filled the air. She stood alone, fingers trembling around the handle of her trunk, wondering whether this was courage or foolishness guiding her steps. A woman approached her. She wore long braids and a calm expression that showed neither judgment nor surprise. She studied the bride gently, as if trying to measure how much fear she carried inside. Then she spoke in soft English, telling her that the king was waiting. The bride nodded and followed, feeling every heartbeat in her chest. She had traveled all this way because she needed a new beginning, chance at safety, and a place that could not be taken from her. She did not expect comfort. She did not expect kindness. She only prayed she would find a life that allowed her to breathe again. The path led between tall hides and past a group of warriors sharpening spears. Their eyes followed her, not with mockery, but with sharp curiosity. She kept her gaze low, the way she had practiced on the coach ride, hoping humility would keep her from trouble. Then the woman guiding her stopped at a large shelter, one lined with decorated blankets and carved wooden poles. Smoke drifted through the top, carrying a warm scent of sagebrush. Inside, the light was soft. A shadow shifted near the far side of the shelter, and the bride felt her throat tighten. The Apache King stepped forward, tall and steady, his presence filling the space. His long dark hair caught the firelight, and he carried himself like a man who belonged to the land itself. She felt the weight of his gaze before she dared look up. When their eyes finally met, she felt exposed in a way she had never known. He said nothing at first. He simply watched her with a quiet patience that felt more powerful than any loud demand. She did not know whether to bow her head or greet him directly. Her hands shook slightly at her sides. The woman who escorted her slipped out. Leaving the two of them alone in the warm glow of the fire, the king took a slow breath, then stepped closer. His voice was deep but calm, carrying a steady strength that felt as steady as a river in late summer. He told her that the agreement for the marriage had been accepted. He told her that she was safe in his camp. He did not promise affection. He did not promise ease. He only promised truth. That, he said, was the only thing that allowed a union to live. The bride tried to answer, but her voice wavered. She told him she had come seeking a new start. She told him she would honor the agreement. She said nothing about the danger she left behind or the life that had chased her across half the country. She feared her past might sound like weakness. She feared showing too much would make him question her worth. The king studied her again, reading the emotions she tried to hide. His gaze moved across her trembling fingers and the tension in her shoulders. Then he spoke the words that made her breath freeze. "Remove your fear. Let me see you as you are. Let me feel your truth." The air felt heavy around them, almost electric. She did not know what he meant at first. Did he want her to confess her past? Did he want her to reveal something she had kept locked inside for years? Or did he simply want to know the real person behind the fragile mask she had worn all the way from the East? He reached out with slow, steady movements and lifted her chin so she would meet his gaze. There was no anger in his touch, only a firm insistence that she'll not hide from him. His eyes held a strength she did not understand, a strength that made her pulse race not from fear, from something she could not yet name. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Memories surged up, memories she tried hard to bury. A stormy night, a man who swore she belonged to him, a life that had never been her choosing. She felt that old fear rising again, filling her chest until she could barely breathe. The king saw it. She could tell by the way his expression changed. He stepped back slightly, giving her space, but his presence still surrounded her like a warm shield. He told her that no one in this camp would harm her. He said that truth did not make a person weak. It made them whole. But she could not speak yet. She could only stand there, torn between the safety he offered and the old shadows chasing her. Across the plains, a gust of wind outside pressed against the hide walls. The fire inside flickered, throwing moving light across the king's face. The bride felt a tremor run through her body. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that she was not stepping from one danger into another. But trust was not something she could give easily. Not after everything that had happened. The king watched her in silence, waiting. He seemed to know that forcing her would only break what little strength she had left. So he waited with a patience that felt endless. But then a sharp sound cut through the camp. Hooves pounded outside, quick and urgent. Voices rose in alarm. Warriors called out from the edge of the clearing. The king turned his head sharply, muscles tightening. The bride felt her heart drop. Trouble had arrived before she even had the chance to speak her truth. "Eh," Ryder shouted, something that made the king's expression darken with sudden concern. He stepped toward the entrance of the shelter, then paused and looked back at her. His eyes carried a warning, and something else. Something she could not yet decipher. He told her to stay inside. Then he stepped into the sunlight. As the camp erupted into motion, leaving her alone with her fear and the sense that whatever was coming toward them was going to change everything. The moment the king stepped into the sunlight, the bride felt the breath inside her tighten again. The shelter suddenly seemed too quiet, like the air itself was listening. She took one small step forward, then stopped, unsure if following his instruction was meant to keep her safe or simply keep her hidden. Outside, voices rose in sharp bursts, carrying a mix of alarm and authority. The crackle of the fire behind her felt distant now. Every sense leaned toward the open doorway, toward the shadows and sun where the fate of this strange new world seemed to be shifting. She gripped her hands together and stood still. The thin hide walls kept out the wind, but not the fear rising inside her. She was still dressed in dust from the trail, still feeling the weight of long miles behind her, still wondering if she had stepped into a life she could not understand. She tried to calm her nerves, telling herself that whatever trouble came, this place was far from her old life. No one here knew her past. No one here knew the threats she had escaped. But part of her feared that dangers had a way of following a person, that some shadows could cross even the widest desert. A deeper voice outside spoke with urgency. It was the king. Then another voice answered him, tense and hurried. She could not make out the words, but she could feel the shift in the camp through the movements outside. Warriors ran past the shelter. Horses snorted. A woman hurried children away from the open space. Something was wrong, and the entire settlement seemed to brace itself against whatever approached. Her heart pounded as she stared at the doorway. She imagined stepping out, doing the opposite of what the king told her. She imagined running to see what danger had arrived. But another part of her, The part that had survived the worst of her past held her feet in place. Stepping into trouble had never saved her before. She paced instead. The ground beneath the hides felt warm, carrying the heartbeat of the camp through the earth. Every few steps, she stopped to listen, trying to count the voices, trying to understand if the trouble was near or far. She could hear the king issuing commands with a calm strength that settled some of the fear inside her. Even in alarm, his voice held steady, like a man who had seen storms before and never let them shake him. But then, through the rush of voices, she caught the words of one warrior. He spoke in a tongue she did not fully understand, but the worry in his tone was unmistakable. The king answered him quickly, and something in that exchange sent a cold wave over her skin. She stepped closer to the hide flap, as if drawn by a pull she couldn't ignore. Just as she reached it, a figure suddenly appeared in the doorway. It was the same woman who had first guided her through the settlement. Her expression was composed, but her eyes held sharp warning. She told the bride to stay inside. The king would return when the matter was handled. The bride nodded, though her curiosity burned even stronger now. When the woman left, the bride finally allowed herself to sit near the fire. She stared into the flames, trying to steady her breath, but the fire only reminded her of another night long ago. A night when she had hidden behind a broken fence, while a man she once trusted shouted her name across a storm-dark yard. She remembered the rain pouring down, the sound of boots slamming against wet earth, the cold dread that told her she had to run no matter the cost. That fear had driven her west. That fear had pushed her onto the wagon to the rail station, then onto the train that rattled across plains and mountains. And that same fear whispered, now that safety was never simple. She shook her head and stood again. She didn't want her past to swallow this moment. She had traveled too far to live in shadows. Yet the more she tried to push her old memories away, the stronger they returned. They came in pieces. A slammed door, a hand gripping her arm, a promise she had not asked for, but could not break. She had escaped that life, but her heart still carried the scars. Outside, the sounds changed again. There was less shouting now, more quiet movement. She heard the stomp of horses, then low voices, as if warriors were surrounding someone. She leaned a little closer to the doorway, her breath catching. A rider must have brought news, she thought. Or maybe danger had arrived at the edge of the camp. The king returned not long after. He pushed back the hide flap and stepped inside, the firelight brushing across the lines of determination on his face. His eyes were sharp from whatever he had just faced. Dust clung to his arms, and his breath carried the coolness of the outside air. The bride stepped back out of instinct, unsure if the threat outside had followed him in. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet intensity. He asked if she had stayed inside. She nodded. He gave a slight nod of approval, then crossed the shelter and sat near the fire. His shoulders were tense, but his voice stayed calm when he spoke again. He said a messenger had arrived from the northern ridge. A group had been spotted trailing near the outer paths. Their intentions were unknown. They carried weapons, but did not approach openly. They watched from a distance. The bride felt her stomach tighten. She asked if they were enemies. The king answered carefully, saying they were strangers, and strangers near the camp were always watched with caution. The desert did not bring visitors without purpose. He said the warriors were tracking them now. He said the camp was safe, but the way he looked into the fire told her he did not fully believe it. Something in the messenger's report had unsettled even him. She asked if he thought the strangers were looking for his people. He said maybe, or maybe they were looking for someone else entirely. The words seemed simple enough, yet they struck her deeply. The fear she had tried to bury rose again. What if danger from her own past had reached farther west than she believed? What if someone had followed her trail across states and territories? She felt the world tilt slightly, but she forced her face to stay calm. The king looked at her again, as if sensing the shift in her breath. He asked her if she feared someone from her old life might come. She froze. It felt as though he had reached straight into her thoughts without warning. She searched for words, but found none that felt safe. She did not want to lie. She also did not want to reveal more than she could handle. So she said only that she had reasons for leaving her old town. Reasons she hoped would not follow her here. He watched her carefully, not pushing, not prying. Then he said something that made her heart beat heavy. He said truth had a way of catching up with a person unless they faced it before it arrived. He told her the land had a way of exposing what people tried to hide. It was not a threat. It was more like a simple truth, spoken without bitterness. The fire popped, and the sound made her flinch. He noticed. Without stepping toward her, he spoke in a lower tone, saying that fear makes a person hear danger where none stands. He told her again that she was safe in his camp, but she would remain safer if she trusted him. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that this settlement, this world, could offer her peace. But trust was something she had never been given. Not from the man she had tried to flee, not from the life she had left behind. Even now, sitting across from a ruler who promised protection, trust felt like a step off a cliff. The king stood and moved toward the entrance, listening to the sounds outside. His posture stayed alert, like a man who lived in constant awareness of the world around him. He told her the warriors would continue tracking the strangers through the night. He said he expected answers by morning. She felt her chest tighten again. She asked what he would do if the strangers meant harm. His answer came steady and certain. He would face them. He always faced danger head-on. But then he added something that made her throat tighten. He said danger near the camp was not only his concern now. He had taken responsibility for her the moment she stepped into his land. The words struck her harder than she expected. Someone claiming responsibility for her well-being felt unfamiliar, almost unreal. It stirred something warm deep inside, something she did not understand. Before she could speak, a faint signal sounded outside. A short whistle, sharp and urgent. The king stepped out again, and she followed to the doorway, but did not cross it. In the fading light, warriors gathered quickly near the corral. They spoke in hurried tones. One pointed toward the far ridge where the sun dipped behind jagged rocks. The air around the camp fell into tense silence. The king's voice rose again, steady and commanding. Warriors mounted their horses, gripping spears and bows, preparing to move out. The king turned back toward the shelter, meeting her eyes for just a moment. Something in his expression held warning and promise all at once. He told her to stay inside again. Then he and the warriors rode off toward the dark ridge where the strangers had been seen. Leaving her standing at the doorway with the wind rising and a new fear settling deep in her chest, she did not know. The danger outside was coming for the camp. Or if it was coming for her. The wind rose after the riders disappeared beyond the ridge, carrying dust across the camp and rattling the hide walls like a restless spirit trying to enter. The bride stood near the entrance long after the king had gone, staring at the fading silhouettes of the warriors. Something inside her tightened with every passing moment. She felt alone again. The same kind of alone she had felt back in her old life when fear pressed in from every side and there was no one to trust. Only now the emptiness felt heavier because she knew danger was moving somewhere out on the land, and she did not know whether it was coming for her or for the people who had just accepted her into their world. When she finally stepped back inside, the fire crackled low, sending soft light across the shelter. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure what to do. She wanted to sit, but her nerves refused to settle. She walked slowly around the fire, listening for voices outside, hoping for any sign that the warriors had returned with good news. Instead, she heard only the calls of distant animals and the shifting of camp life as night crept in. A young boy appeared in the doorway, carrying a small bowl. He stared up at her with wide eyes full of curiosity, not fear. He handed her the bowl without speaking, as if he had been told to bring it. Inside was warm stew, thick with herbs and pieces of meat. She thanked him gently. He lingered a moment, studying her face like someone trying to understand a new story. Then he ran off before she could ask who sent the food. She sat near the fire and ate slowly, each bite grounding her in the moment. The stew tasted stronger than anything she had eaten back home. It carried spices she could not name, flavors that seemed to remind her she was far from the world she once knew. a world where she lived by caution instead of courage. As she finished eating, footsteps approached the shelter again. The woman with the braids stepped inside, her face lit softly by the fire. She sat across from the bride and studied her the way a healer studies a wound, not judging, just trying to understand what lies beneath the surface. The woman asked if the bride was frightened. The bride hesitated, then answered honestly. Yes, she was frightened. The woman nodded as if she expected that answer. She said the land always tested newcomers with uncertainty. She said the desert revealed truths about people quicker than any words could. When the bride asked what kind of people the strangers on the ridge might be, the woman's eyes darkened slightly. She said no one knew yet, but they had been seen more than once in recent days, and they watched the camp from afar. The bride felt a chill run through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She asked the woman if the king suspected danger. The woman gave a slow nod. The king trusted the desert, she said, and if the desert whispered danger, he listened. Her words only deepened the bride's unease. She wondered whether the strangers had anything to do with her. The fear she had run from did not feel like something that would disappear icily. She wondered if she had been foolish to hope she could outrun her past. When the woman finally left, the bride lay down near the fire and tried to rest, but sleep would not come. Her mind kept replaying the king's words. Let me see you as you are. Let me feel your truth. She did not understand how he saw through her so quickly, or why his voice carried a strength that made her want to trust him even when she had no reason to trust anyone. Sometime in the night she rose and stepped outside. The camp had grown quiet. Only a few fires burned low, and most of the people slept. She walked slowly toward the edge of the settlement, drawn by the dark sky over the open plains. The moon hung low, casting silver across the land. She breathed deeper, letting the night wind brush against her cheeks. She wanted to believe she was safe here. She wanted to believe the king's promise. But danger had a way of finding cracks in a person's hope. She listened to the quiet and felt her past creeping up her spine like cold fingers. She imagined the man she had fled riding across counties and territories, fueled by anger and a sense of ownership he had no right to claim. She imagined him finding her name on some list, finding out where she had gone. Her heart began to race. She pushed the thought away. Then she saw movement. At first she thought it was one of the camp's guards, but the figure stood too still, too far from the firelight. Half hidden behind a large rock near the corral, she blinked, trying to see clearer in the moonlight. The figure shifted again, the faint shape of a horse behind him. Her breath caught. She took a step back, then another. The figure seemed to turn its head toward her. She froze, unsure if she had truly been seen or if the dark had played tricks on her. She kept staring, waiting for the shape to move closer or disappear, before she could decide whether to return to the shelter or call out for help. A hand closed around her arm. She gasped, but the grip was gentle. When she turned, she saw an older warrior standing beside her. He shook his head silently, motioning her back toward the shelter. His eyes were firm, and though he said nothing, she understood the warning. Strangers were near, watching, waiting. She retreated slowly as the warrior stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the dark shape beyond the corral. When she reached the shelter again, she sat with shaking hands, listening as the warrior's muffled footsteps faded into the night. Morning came with pale gold sunlight and a tense quiet. The bride stepped outside to see people moving through the camp with purpose. Warriors spoke in low voices. Women gathered children closer. The air felt thick with unspoken worry. She walked toward the center of the settlement, hoping to find answers. The same braided woman approached her again and guided her toward a shaded area near the cooking fires. She told the bride that the strangers had been seen again before dawn, closer this time. Tracks were found along the northern boundary of the camp. Hoofprints and footprints. Not a hunting party. Not travelers. Whoever they were intentionally circling the camp. The bride's heart thudded heavily. She asked if anyone had identified them. The woman shook her head. They did not wear the dress of local settlers. They did not carry the marks of any known tribes. That made them unpredictable. The bride wondered again if they were connected to the world she had tried so desperately to leave behind. Each hour that passed seemed to tie her past to her present with a tighter knot. The king returned to the camp near midday. Dust covered his horse and tension lined his jaw. Warriors followed him, some carrying newly discovered items: an abandoned saddlebag, a piece of broken leather, a torn bit of cloth. None of these things belonged to the camp. The bride watched from a distance as the king examined the items with narrowed eyes. He stood quiet for a long moment, then gave orders that sent warriors spreading out in different directions. When he finally approached the shelter, his voice was still steady, but there was something sharp beneath it. He told her the strangers had not left. They had doubled back. They were not lost travelers. They were tracking something. Or someone. Her breath trembled. She asked if he believed she had something to do with it. He studied her face closely, searching for something she could not name. Then he told her he did not jump to fear. But he did listen to what the land revealed. The land was telling him that something was being hunted. She felt her knees weaken. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. He told her she needed to speak her truth soon, if not to him, then at least to herself. Because whatever approached the camp walked with purpose. Before she could answer, another rider stormed into the clearing. His horse was sweating and wild-eyed. He shouted news that made every warrior halt. A fire had been set near the northern pass. Not a natural fire. A signal fire. Someone was calling others in. The king's jaw tightened. He mounted his horse again. When he looked at the bride, his expression was both fierce and unreadable. He told her to stay near the shelter. He told her not to wander. Then he rode out with half the warriors at his side, leaving the bride standing alone with the unsettling truth that the strangers on the ridge were not just watching, they were gathering. And whatever was coming next would drag her past, straight into her new life, whether she was ready or not. The smoke from the signal fire drifted into the afternoon sky like a warning written across the open plains. The bride watched it from the edge of the camp, her heart pounding in a rhythm she could not quiet. The camp had grown tense. Every movement felt sharper, faster. Children were brought close to their mothers. Warriors gathered weapons and checked their horses. Even the animals sensed the unrest. The horses stamped the ground restlessly, and the dogs stayed close to the shelters. She stood near the hide walls, trying to keep her breath steady. She wanted to believe she was safe, wanted to take comfort in the king's words. But deep down, she feared the truth was closing in. She feared the strangers gathering beyond the ridge were not here for the camp at all. They were here because of her. The idea pressed against her chest until she felt she could barely breathe. The braided woman approached again, placing a gentle hand on the bride's arm. She spoke softly, telling her the warriors would protect the settlement, that the king had never failed his people. But the bride heard something else under her voice, a worry the woman was trying to hide. Even she did not know what the strangers wanted. Even she felt the danger rising like a storm on the horizon as the afternoon passed. The sky dimmed beneath heavy clouds that gathered over the mountains. The air thickened with the smell of coming rain. Voices carried across the camp, low and steady, as the warriors prepared for whatever was approaching. The bride stayed close to the shelter, her hands trembling at her sides. Her mind racing with thoughts she did not want to face. When the king finally returned, the camp shifted. People looked toward him with hope and fear. Dust covered him from the ride, and his horse breathed hard, sweat shining along its neck. The king dismounted quickly, his eyes scanning the camp before landing on her. His look was direct, searching, and full of something she could not read. He walked toward her with long, steady strides. She stepped back a half step, unsure whether he came with news she wanted to hear. When he reached her, he spoke in a low voice, telling her the fire was no accident. The strangers were sending a signal to others. They were waiting for reinforcements. They had moved closer to the settlement's border and were circling again. Her stomach tightened. She asked if he knew why. He held her gaze for a long moment before answering. He said the trail of the strangers had led to old wagon tracks and signs of a broken camp. like someone had been on a long hunt. He said the tracks had crossed her path from the east. Her breath caught. The world felt suddenly smaller, closing around her like a tightening rope. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. The king stepped closer, lowering his voice further. He told her that no one could protect her if she hid from the truth. He said the land spoke through signs, and the land was telling him that something from her past was near. She felt the pressure inside her build like rising water. She wanted to tell him everything, to let the words spill out and free her from the fear she carried. But the memories surged too fast. She saw again the face she had spent so long trying to escape, the stormy night she ran. The threats whispered in her ear before she climbed into the wagon heading west. She shook her head, feeling tears sting her eyes. She told the king she had reasons for leaving her old life, reasons she prayed would not follow her here. He listened without interrupting, his expression strong yet patient. When she finished, he told her he did not fear shadows from the past, but he said dangers grew stronger when left unspoken. Before she could answer, a loud shout echoed through the camp. A warrior ran toward the king, calling him urgently. The king turned sharply as the warrior spoke in quick bursts. The bride could not understand the words, but the urgency in the warrior's voice made her heart race. The king's jaw tightened. He told her to go inside the shelter. He told her not to step outside until he returned. She wanted to protest, wanted to demand to know what was happening. But he had already turned away, moving toward the group of warriors gathering near the corral. She stepped back into the shelter, but she could not sit still. She paced near the fire, listening to the rising commotion outside. Horses whinnied sharply. Men shouted to one another. The tension grew until she felt it pressing into the hide walls. The air inside the shelter felt heavy with fear. The sound of hooves thundered just outside. She peered through the small opening in the hide wall and saw warriors riding out again, spears glinting in the dimming light. The king rode at the front, his posture fierce and unyielding. Like a man prepared to face whatever waited beyond the ridge, the bride watched him disappear into the thickening clouds. And her chest tightened with an emotion she did not fully understand. She feared for him, feared for the camp, feared for herself. But another part of her felt drawn to him, trusted him in a way she had never trusted another person. Night fell faster than she expected. The sky darkened and the wind picked up, whipping dust across the camp. Fires were lit near the center to keep the children warm. Women gathered in groups, speaking softly and watching the ridge with uneasy eyes. The bride stepped outside despite her instructions. The air felt cold on her skin. Colder than the desert should have been at that hour. The braided woman found her again and pulled her closer to the fire. She told her the king had found new tracks near the pass. Men on horseback had tried to approach the camp from the north. The warriors had forced them back, but the men retreated only a short distance. They were waiting, testing the defenses, learning how the Apache king moved. The bride swallowed hard. She felt her heart beating with painful force. She asked if the warriors recognized the men. The woman shook her head. They wore no tribe's colors, carried rifles common to distant towns, and rode like men familiar with the land but not native to it. The bride felt her hands grow cold. She tried to steady her breath, but it shook. The woman watched her closely and asked again if there was something she was hiding. The bride opened her mouth to answer, but a sudden noise cut through the camp. A horn blast, sharp, urgent, close. Women gasped. Children clung to their mothers. Warriors rushed toward the perimeter. The bride felt her knees weaken as she stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the fires. Another blast echoed across the plains. She felt dread sink deep inside her. The sound was not from the camp. It came from the direction of the ridge. From the men gathering in the darkness, the braided woman pulled her back into the shelter, her voice low and tense. She told her the horn meant the strangers had moved closer, close enough to risk announcing themselves. The woman whispered that only someone desperate, someone determined, would signal so boldly at night near an Apache settlement. The bride sat trembling near the fire. Her breath came fast, shallow. She knew that sound. She had heard a horn like that once before, a long time ago, when her old life had closing around her. She remembered the night she fled. She remembered a man shouting orders. She remembered a horn cutting through the storm to summon others to search for her. She pressed a hand to her mouth as the truth hit. Her heart, the strangers were not searching the land. They were searching for her. Outside, warriors shouted commands. Horses screamed and pounded their hooves. The camp buzzed with frantic movement as people prepared for whatever was coming across the plains. Then, through the storm-dark night, the bride heard something that pierced her heart, the king's voice, firm, commanding, unyielding. He called for the warriors to form a line near the eastern ridge. He called for guards to protect the families. He called for strength and readiness. As if expecting the confrontation to strike at any moment, the bride stepped to the doorway, clutching the hide flap as she listened. Her whole body trembled, but she did not back away. She watched the king mount his horse again, his silhouette sharp against the firelit dust. He rode to the front line, where his warriors formed a barrier between the camp and the darkness. The stranger's horn blasted again. Closer than before, the king raised his hand, signaling his warriors to hold. The camp fell. Silent, the bride felt her heart stop for just a moment, because whatever happened next would decide everything. And, deep down, she knew the truth she had tried so long to escape was racing toward the camp with the force of a storm, ready to break open the world she had only just begun to trust. The horn blast faded into the night air, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against every heartbeat in the camp. The bride clutched the hide flap tighter, staring into the dark where the strangers waited. The king held his place at the front line, unmoving on his horse, his posture steady, despite the danger closing in. The fires behind him flickered in the wind, casting long shadows across the faces of the warriors who trusted him with their lives. The bride felt the weight of what was coming, but she also felt something else rising inside her, something stronger than fear. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting her past control every breath she took. She stepped out of the shelter more than halfway, unable to stay back any longer. When the king glanced over his shoulder and saw her, his eyes flashed with a warning. But she could not return inside. Not when she knew this danger had come because of her. She walked slowly toward him, her hands trembling, but her steps steady. When she reached him, she told him quietly that she needed to speak the truth, the whole truth, before the strangers burst into the camp and forced it into the open. His jaw tightened. But he nodded once, allowing her to speak. She stood near him, facing the ridge where dark shapes flickered in the moonlight. With a voice that quivered at first, but grew steadier with every word, she told him what she had run from. She told him about the man back east who believed he owned her future, a man who had tried to force her into a life she never agreed to. She told him how she fled under the cover of heavy rain, how she hid on a wagon headed west, and how she prayed the miles would bury that past for good. She told him she feared the strangers were connected to that man, sent to drag her back to a world she never wanted. The king listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, he turned his gaze toward the ridge again. His voice came low, but firm. He told her she was no one's possession. He told her no part of her past would ever claim her again. And he promised that whatever or whoever came for her would face the full strength of his people. His words steadied her trembling heart, settling a storm that had lived inside her far too long. Before she could speak again, another horn blast sounded, closer and sharper. Figures on horseback emerged through the darkness, riding toward the camp with careful steps. The king raised his arm and his warriors tightened their line. The bride's breath caught as the riders came into view, their shadows stretching long behind them. There were only 3 men, but they carried themselves with the confidence of people who believed they had authority over others. They stopped a distance from the warriors, waiting, watching. The king signaled for 2 warriors to approach. Together, they rode forward until they stood within earshot of the strangers. The leader of the group leaned forward in his saddle, calling out that he was searching for a runaway, a woman who belonged back east, a woman who had been promised in an arrangement, a woman he intended to reclaim. The bride felt the world spin for a moment. The voice of the stranger was all too familiar. It belonged to one of the men who had hunted her before. Not the man she had fled from, but one of his hired hands, a tracker who made his living returning runaways to the people who claimed them. The king rode forward before the bride could stop him. He faced the three men with a calm that felt sharper than any anger. His voice carried across the open space, steady and strong. He told the strangers the woman they spoke of was under the protection of the Apache people. He told them she had come willingly. He told them no one who sought to claim ownership over another had any right to approach this camp. The stranger laughed, a cold sound that grated against the stillness. He said the king had no authority over business from the east, no claim over contracts signed under law, no power to deny a rightful owner. The bride felt her pulse hammer as the stranger demanded she be handed over. He claimed she was promised, that a price had been paid, that her attempt to run changed nothing. The king's expression hardened. He told the man the only law that mattered on this land was the one that protected a human being's freedom. He said no woman belonged to anyone, not here, not ever, and he warned the men that if they attempted to cross into the camp, they would be met with force. The stranger raised his rifle slightly, not pointing it directly, but enough to stir the warriors. The bride stepped forward before she could second-guess herself. She called out the stranger's name, making him jolt in surprise. She told him she was not a possession. She told him she had never agreed to the arrangement he spoke of. She told him the man he worked for had no right to her, and never had. Her voice trembled, but did not break. For a moment the stranger said nothing. Then his expression shifted, growing cold and frustrated. He ordered the bride to come forward. He claimed he was only doing his job. He claimed she had no idea how far the reach of the east extended. The king's horse stepped between her and the stranger, shielding her completely. His voice came strong. He repeated his warning. "Leave now. Do not return." The strangers looked around at the line of warriors, realizing that crossing that barrier meant certain defeat. They whispered among themselves, anger rising in their faces, but they saw the truth. The Apache camp stood united. No one here would bend. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt and turned his horse. He said this was not over. He said the east had long arms. Then he and his men rode off into the darkness, their figures swallowed by the night. The camp held still until the last echo of hooves faded. Slowly, the warriors lowered their weapons. Mothers stepped out with their children again. The fire crackled louder as the wind eased. The king dismounted and walked to the bride. His presence calmer now, though his eyes still watched the ridge carefully. She felt her knees weaken, and he steadied her with a hand lightly placed on her arm. She whispered her thanks, but her voice cracked with emotion. He told her she owed him no thanks. He said truth had given them strength. He said truth had freed her. She felt tears run down her cheeks. It's not from fear this time, but from a release she had never known. For the first time, her past no longer felt like a chain, but like a story she had survived. The camp slowly returned to a peaceful rhythm. Families went back to their fires. Warriors set night watches, but carried themselves with confidence, knowing the strangers were gone. The king guided the bride back to the shelter, the fire glowing warmly inside. When she sat, he crouched beside her, speaking gently. He told her that she could stay here as long as she wished. He told her that no one in this land would claim her or command her. Her life was hers to shape. Her path was hers to choose. She met his eyes, feeling something deep settle inside her. She told him she didn't want to run anymore. She told him she wanted to build a new life, not out of fear but out of choice. He nodded slowly, accepting her words not as a promise to him, but as a promise to herself. He stayed near her until her breath steadied. The fire warmed the shelter, filling it with soft light. The danger had passed, but the change within her felt even greater. She felt stronger. She felt seen. She felt safe. As dawn lit the horizon, the king walked with her outside. The sky glowed with soft gold, touching the land in warm color. The camp stirred gently, free from fear. The bride watched the sunrise, feeling the weight of her past drift away with the night. The king stood beside her, quiet and steady. He told her the land would welcome her if she welcomed herself. And she nodded, knowing now that she was ready. The strangers were gone. Her past had lost its hold, and for the first time in her life, she felt the future open like a wide, unbroken trail stretching across the glowing plains. A place to begin again. A place to belong.